In this video, we're going to get started doing a pretty major refactor of the open-api code. I actually have a list of things that we're going to do here, but largely what this is going to involve is getting rid of dagger-android, so moving away from dagger-android because dagger-android is a pain in the ass, basically. It's very limited to what you can do with it in that if you use the @contributes injector things, basically if you use it, it puts you in a box, and that box doesn't let you do certain things, especially when it comes to navigation components, building custom navigation, different navigation graphs for different parts of the app. It just becomes really difficult, and at the end of the day, I think it's just better just to use plain old Dagger. The conveniences that Dagger Android adds is really, they're not really conveniences at all in my opinion. You end up writing pretty much the exact same amount of code, and it puts you in a box, and it makes you really limited with what you can do. So anyway, in this video, like I said, we're going to be getting rid of all the Dagger Android stuff, all the Dagger Android dependencies, and refactoring the project to just use regular Dagger. And we're going to do a couple other things too, just because if I don't do these things now, I know I'm going to want to do them later anyway. So I might as well just do it all in one. So remove Dagger Android is number one on the list. Then we want to refactor to use Fragment Factory to provide all of the fragments. So if you've been watching my espresso course or following me on Twitter with some of my newest projects I've been creating, you know that I've been using the Fragment Factory, the new Fragment Factory system for providing fragments, because it allows you to do constructor injection with your fragments. So it makes testing way easier, basically. So I want to use that, obviously, because it's quote unquote, the new best practice way to use fragments. So of course I want to use that. Next, remove the stupid main dependency provider as a workaround for Dagger Android. So that was a Dagger Android workaround. So it was because Dagger Android put you in this box, it forced you to inject dependencies at a certain time when other things weren't ready. So you had to build this interface. Very stupid. Anyway, we can get rid of that. Create a custom NavHostFragment for each feature. So that means auth, account, blog, and create blog. If you remember, you've probably just finished watching the course, so you have auth, obviously. Well, you know the features. So we're going to build a custom navigation host for each one of those features. Largely, the app won't change because of this. I think it's just a better way to do the navigation, having a separate nav host, a separate custom nav host, which will have its own fragment factory in it, which we'll talk more about that when I actually do the refactor. And then lots of other cleanup. As I said here in the note, it says I'm really happy with this refactor, and I'm going to make a video on it. But be warned, it's going to be long and difficult. So that's this video that you're watching right now. It's going to be long and difficult, but lots of really great changes, kind of all of the newest, latest and greatest, I guess, ways to set these things up. I think you'll really like it. Again, this video is going to be long. I wouldn't be surprised if this video turns out to be an hour long, but just kind of, if you have to, watch it, piece by piece or a little bit at a time. But these are really important things that you should be doing. So. And then after this one, we are going to fix the MVI limitation. So currently the project can only handle like a single state event at any given time. So if you fire off a state event, basically you have to wait for the result before you fire off another one. So I'm going to refactor the code in another video, not this video, so that it uses channels and flows, a new Kotlin feature, Kotlin coroutine feature, so that it can handle any amount of state events coming into the view model, and then just emits results as they come in. So like you could have 10 state events, 100 state events, doesn't matter how many state events, all being executed simultaneously in parallel. So a really cool refactor coming up after this video. All right, let's get started. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is change the dependencies. So I'm in the build.gradle file here. Oh, just so you know, also I have the branch navigation bug, which is the video that was before this one. So I'm starting from there. I should have the exact same code you do, as long as you check out the project from version control. So now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to delete all of this Dagger stuff. So I'm going into build.gradle and I'm just deleting all the Dagger dependencies. And now I'm going to open up the, I got the master branch selected for the project. Or you could go to the branch that's called remove Dagger Android, I think. Let me just look and see here. Let me see. I'm pretty sure it's remove. Yeah, so remove Dagger Android. You can select that branch, doesn't matter. And scroll down and grab all of the dependencies for Dagger. So notice we only need 2 because we're only using regular Dagger. And also notice that I've added a newer version. So version 2.25.4. So I'm just grabbing these, going back to Android Studio, and I'm going to paste those in where we had our Dagger stuff before. And I'll just write Dagger there and then sync this. Now this is, if you tried to build a project now, obviously you're going to get issues because we still have all of our old Dagger Android stuff in there currently. But now we're going to move forward with this refactor and change all that. Okay, so I'm going to kind of do this piece by piece because I know it's going to be hard to follow. There's going to be a lot of things that we need to do. So just kind of watch carefully. Like I said, even if you have to like go through this like super slowly and it takes you like a long time, just watch it bit by bit and you'll see you'll kind of get what I'm doing. So first we are going to go into the base application class and we're going to get rid of all this shit that we have from previous stupid Dagger Android. We don't need you. Get out of here. So deleting all of this stuff. You'll see that regular Dagger actually makes things like a lot simpler, I think. Which is kind of funny because Dagger Android was supposed to make things simpler. So now because we're using regular Dagger, we're going to keep a reference to the app component inside of the application class. So there we go, app component, and then we need a function for initializing it. So I'll call it function init app component, and then just have, you know, app component equals Dagger app component, and we have our builder, and then get the application reference, and then do build. And then of course just call init app component inside of onCreate, and then we're ready to move on to the next part. So I'm going to close this for now. We're going to be coming back to that later in this video, but for now we're good. Now let's go into the app component, and we need to change this. So get rid of the Android injection module, because that was part of Dagger Android. We're going to actually be deleting the activity builders module, so we can get rid of that. And we're also going to be deleting the view model factory module, because we're going to be providing the view models a little differently. We're still going to use map multi-bindings, but we're just going to be kind of doing it a little different. So I don't need to inject the application. I'm going to get rid of that, and I'm going to create an inject on the base activity class. So base activity. I'll talk more about that later, but that should be all I need to do for now. And now we're going to update the app module. Okay, so going on into the app module, I'm going to change this to an object, so to a singleton, and then we can add JVM static to each one of these. So we could have done this before with Dagger Android. I don't know why I didn't, but because apparently this is the best practice way. It's like quote unquote the fastest way to have your dependencies if you use Dagger is to declare your module a singleton and then have JVM static. You know, I'm not really sure about the details. You'd have to do some reading on that, but I've talked to a number of people who are very experienced with Dagger, and this is the way they say to do it. So I'm just kind of doing what they tell me. And everything else is the same. So we're not changing anything else here, just kind of doing a little bit of an upgrade to that. Now we're going to delete some stuff. So I'm going to delete the activity builders module, because this is strictly a Dagger Android thing, this contribute Android injector. This is one of the reasons why I don't like it. Basically what this does is it forces you to build subcomponents that are tied to the activity. So the subcomponents are essentially scoped to the activity itself, and they kind of just become intertwined, and I don't like it. So anyway, we're deleting this. Goodbye. Activity builders module. We're also deleting injectable, this injectable interface. We don't need that. And also we're deleting app injector. We don't need that either. None of these things are necessary. And the view model factory module, we will also delete that. We're still going to need a view model factory for providing our view models, but we won't be using that. Now the view model key, what are we going to do with that? So what we're actually going to be doing is we're going to be creating a custom view model factory. We're going to have actually two map multi-bindings, one for the, so if we go into our UI package, we have auth and we have main. So we're going to actually create a auth view model factory and a main view model factory. So obviously the auth view model factory will be for providing the view models inside of auth, which is there's just one. And then the other one will be for the view models that are inside here. So that'll be account view model, blog view model, and create blog view model. So right now I will actually take this key. I'll take this key and I'm going to press Control X on it. So I'm going to cut it. Now I'm going to go inside of auth. I'm going to create a new package named keys. And inside keys, I'm going to paste that. So now I'm just refactoring this. So now our view model key is inside here, but I'm going to refactor this again. So I'm going right clicking, going to rename, and this is going to be called auth view model key. So it's going to be the key for the map multi-binding for those ones. Just coming in here to make sure that's okay. That's all good. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to press Control C on this keys package, and I'm going to paste it inside of main and press OK. So now we have a second one. So you can see it's giving me a warning here because I called this auth view model, but there already is one. So I'm going to rename this to main view model key. So now I have two different view model keys. I have auth view model key and main view model key. and those will be the keys for the two different maps for the view model factories. Okay, so now we're going to start. So we're going to continue working with the Dagger stuff, but we're going to kind of work with auth, and then we're going to work with the main package stuff. So first we're going to start in auth, and then we're going to have to come back to the app component and make some changes in there later, but let's just do it one step at a time. So we can delete the auth fragment builders module. We don't need that anymore because remember, we're going to be creating a fragment factory and be providing the fragments that way. So we don't need that. That was a dagger-android thing. Next, I'm going to delete the auth view model module, or are we just going to be refactoring this? No, I'm going to be refactoring this. So I'll just leave that for now, but we will come back to that. Auth scope can be the same. The auth module, we can do the same thing as we did in the app module. So changing this to an object, or otherwise known as a singleton, and then get the JVM static in here. So actually, while I'm doing that, I'll also go into main and do the same thing. So going into main module, and let's just change this to object and get that JVM static. JVM, why won't it JVM static me? JVM static? That was weird. The autocomplete was not, did I not put an @ sign or something? I probably didn't put an @ sign. Anyway, so now we're going to leave main and go back to auth. So as I said, we're going to be using a custom view model factory for both the auth package and the main package. So I'm going to create that custom view model factory for the auth package. So here we have the view model provider factory for using map multi-bindings for the current system. So I'm going to change this to do it for just the auth. So essentially, I'm just going to right click here, go to refactor. I'm going to change this to, let's just do auth view model factory. So auth view model factory, click refactor, click OK. And I'm going to scope this to the auth scope. So only the auth scope is going to be using this one. And everything else is the same. We don't need to actually change anything else. And since I'm in here right now, I'm going to press Control C on this and go into view models, paste, and I'm also going to create one for main. So just to rename this to main view model factory because we are going to need one for main anyway, and then just scope this to the main scope. So we need to do this. You might be wondering, well, these are exactly the same, Mitch. Why are you even bothering to do this? Well, you need to do this because the auth section and the main section, they're going to be two different subcomponents in the application in the Dagger graph. So if you have two different subcomponents, you have to have two, and you use map multi-bindings to provide something, you have to have two separate factories for each one of those subcomponents. Like I can't just make one view model factory. I can't put that into like the application component, the app component, and then use map multi-bindings to provide view models in each package. So if you want separate view models inside of the different scopes, you have to have separate factories inside those scopes. So that's why we're doing this. Might seem a little bit weird, but it's just what you have to do. So it's not a big deal. We're done. It only took, a minute or two. Now we are going to build the auth component. So I'm going to right click on auth here. This is going to be the subcomponent, essentially the auth subcomponent. So auth, I'll call it auth component. It's going to be a subcomponent of the app component. Those of you, I expect you to understand how Dagger works. Basically, you have like components and you have subcomponents. The app component, so that means this component right here is the application level component that lives for the lifetime of the application. But we want subcomponents that only exist for certain parts of the app. So like auth, when you're in the auth section of the app, that's when the auth subcomponent exists. Once they log in, that's destroyed. We don't need the dependencies that are inside of the authentication section, so those get destroyed. So that's why we're building two different subcomponents. So inside of this component, let's write this out. So it's going to be a subcomponent. So annotate with @subcomponent. I can open this up and we have some modules that we'll be passing here. Let me just clean this up a little bit. The first module, of course, is going to be the auth module. And the other ones we haven't, we have the view model module. So auth view model module, which we still need to refactor. And then later we'll be adding some more, one more, but we haven't built it yet. So now this is going to be an interface named auth component, and we are going to be using this new subcomponent factory kind of builder interface. So let me just write this out and I'll talk about it. So you haven't seen this before, but this is kind of a new feature for Dagger. It's just a new way to generate components. So you're familiar with the builder kind of interface pattern where you have component.builder, you have the builder, and then you just build it and you return the component. Well, this is exactly the same. It's just supposed to be more efficient. They introduced this, I don't know, in one of the newer Dagger versions, it's basically exactly the same. So just think of this builder pattern is exactly the same as this factory pattern. Its job is to produce an auth component. This builder pattern's job is to produce an app component. So it's the same thing. Just a different way to like structure it basically. And the only thing that we need to inject or add to the Dagger graph, to this Dagger graph, is auth activity, because obviously this lives to provide dependencies to auth activity, to the auth section of the app. Okay, now let's go into the auth view model module. And right now this is just providing the auth view model, but I also want to provide the factory. So I want to do @auth scope and do @binds and then do abstract fun bind view model factory, and this will be factory, and I'll name it, or the object type is going to be the auth view model factory, and that will return view model provider dot factory. So pretty much the same here, just adding auth scope and the different auth view model factory, because remember we have a factory for each section, for each subcomponent, one for the auth component and then one also for the main component. Now we want to do exactly the same thing that we just did, but inside of the main section here. So I want to delete main fragment builders module. We don't need that. Now we're going to go into main module, and I've already refactored this to be a singleton and have JVM static, so that's fine. We don't need to change that at all. Now inside of main view model module, we need to provide that that view model factory. So @binds, and I'll do abstract fun. I'll do provide view model factory. We'll call it factory, and this will be the main view model factory, and then that will just return view model provider dot factory. So exactly the same thing that we did inside of the auth view model module, but this I'm going to scope to the main scope, and I'm going to add all of these to the main scope. So main scope, main scope, main scope. So nothing changes here. All that we've done essentially is create two separate map multi-bindings, one for the main subcomponent or the main component and one for the auth component. So I also need to build this main component. So right clicking here, going to new Kotlin file, calling this, actually, you know what? I can just copy the auth component. So pressing Control C on auth component, pasting it into main, going over and then renaming this to main component. And then we just need to change this stuff. So this will be main module. This will be main view model module, and we're going to need a main fragment module, which we don't have yet. This returns a main component, and this is going to inject main activity. So main activity, or add main activity to the Dagger graph. Oh, actually, I almost forgot. These are, oh no, yeah, they're using the main view model key. That's good, okay. So it automatically was smart enough to figure that out. These use the main view model key, and then this one uses, oh, this should be the auth view model key. So in auth view model module, make sure you're using the auth view model key, and inside of the main view model module, make sure you're using the main view model key. That'll keep those two providers separate, those two map multi-binding separate, and we can clean up these dependencies. Okay, so now that we have our two subcomponents, one is the auth component and one is the main component. Notice they're annotated with @subcomponent, not component. We need to associate these with our app component. So that's this component right here. So the app component is at the top, and then you have the two subcomponents that kind of split off in two separate directions. So you have the app component at the top sitting alone, and then we'll say the app component sitting at the top alone, and then it splits off into two subcomponents, the auth component and the main component. I should have built diagrams for you, but I didn't really prepare that well for this. So yeah, so now we want to associate those with the app component, because right now they're kind of just standing alone. They have no tie to each other. So we're going to create a new class. So right click on DI, go to new Kotlin file, and this is going to be called the subcomponents module. This is to create that association of the two subcomponents with the app component. So annotate this with @module and open this up and use the keyword subcomponents, and this is going to be a list. I want to reference the auth component and then also the main component. So the thing I love about this Dagger stuff and how it's different from Dagger-android is everything's actually really intuitive, and you'll see when I set this up how intuitive this actually seems. So then class subcomponents module, there's our new subcomponent. Now I want to go into the app component and reference this. So I want to do subcomponents module. So now it has a reference to it. And then to finish it off, we save a reference to the factories inside of the app component so that we can create these subcomponents at runtime. So fun, I'll call it auth component, and it's going to return an auth component dot factory, and then fun main component, and that will return a main component dot factory. So again, this is for actually generating them. That way, just as an example, if I was like in, I don't know, let's just go into, I don't know, go into the base application class. Suppose I wanted to generate those subcomponents, I could just do app component dot main component dot create, and then there you go, I have a reference to it. Like this would be value main component, and then I have a reference to it. That's how you create it. And then you could then you would inject your main activity, or in the case with auth, so if I went, value auth component equals app component dot auth component dot create, you could inject auth activity. So that's kind of the game that we're going to be playing when we actually get to that point. But for now, just kind of leave it as it is. Okay, so now before we move forward with kind of the newest stuff, so by the way, this is pretty much we've now pretty much completely migrated to dagger-android with a few more things that we have to do, but like largely that's it. So just so you know, that's pretty much how it's done. We have a main component which exists for the lifetime of the application, which is app component. Then you have the two subcomponents, auth and main, which we've created. Of course, there's still more things like tying this into the actual application logic, the business logic, all that kind of stuff. But generally, that's the conversion. So pretty cool. Pretty easy actually. Now that I've done it on video, like it wasn't as difficult as I thought it was going to be. So now I want to do some refactoring before we move on to creating the fragment factories for all the fragments in the project, and also for when we create the navigation host, so the custom navigation hosts. So let's go into API, go into auth, go into open-api auth service, and I want to scope this to auth scope because I forgot to scope this in the original source code. So I just want to fix this hiccup, I guess. Then scope this to the main scope, so the open-api main service. Now we're done in API. Next, go down to, we'll skip persistence, go into repository, go into auth, go into auth repository, scope this to the auth scope. Now go into main, go into account repository. We're also going to scope this to main scope. Looks like I have some unused dependencies up here, just a log one. So close that, then go into blog repository, same thing, main scope, and then create blog repository, same thing, also main scope. So now those have been scoped correctly. So now minimizing this. What else do we need to do? Did I scope these? Yes, I scoped that. I scoped that. That's good. I think that is it. Session manager should be a singleton. Yes, it is. That's good. Okay, next we're going to do a minor refactor to base activity. So if you don't remember, base activity is the class that both main activity and auth activity extend. So if you go into auth activity, notice it extends base activity, and if you go into main activity, notice it also extends base activity. So we're going into base activity, and we're going to provide the initial injection of the app component. So I'm going to create a abstract class. So go to the top here and just do fun abstract. This is an abstract class, isn't it? Yeah. Oh, abstract fun, sorry. I was wondering why it wasn't working. I'm going to call it inject. It's going to be overridden in both auth activity and main activity to inject them into the Dagger graph. Now we want to insert on create and then call inject before the super is called. But before we can do that, we need to get rid of this dirty old Dagger app compat activity. And we want to go back to plain old app compat activity. That's what we are going to be using from now on. So now going down, pressing Control O, looking for the onCreate function. I want to get the one with just the saved instance state, and then before the super, I want to call inject. So now this can be overridden in both auth activity and main activity, which you'll see, and then they'll be injected into the graph, which is what we want. So if you take a look at app component, notice we have base activity here, which will then we'll add it to the graph so that we have access to all of these dependencies, like the session manager, everything in the app module, everything that we need. So just need to add that inject. Pretty simple. Okay, now comes, I guess, theoretically the hard part, because I think this is going to be the hardest part for you to understand because it's something that I haven't covered in any courses. But this is kind of the newest best practice way to use fragments, I guess, because it allows you to use constructor injection with fragments, and you provide them through a special factory. And we're also going to tie this into navigation components because we're going to build a custom NavHostFragment for each section of the app. So whether it's auth, I'll actually run the app just so I can give you, I can't even run, hold on, I'll start the app and I'll show you. So as you know, there's kind of four main parts to the app. There's the login section. So I'll just log in for you just so you can get a visual. So this is the auth section, the main kind of login, register, forgot password section. Then once you actually log in, so I'll just skip the video ahead here while I type my password. So there I've typed my password. Now I'm going to log in. Now this section of the app is main, which main is composed of three different sections. So you have home, which is the blog section, create, which is create blog. So if you look in UI, if you expand main, you have blog, create blog, and account, and account's over here. So we're going to create a separate navigation graph for each of those four sections. So the auth section, account section, blog, and create blog. All of those will have separate navigation host fragments, and inside those navigation host fragments, they have their own factories for producing those fragments. So that's what we're going to be doing now. We're going to be building each of those factories and also building the navigation hosts. So let's get started with that. So actually, I was going to write this out, but I don't really want to write this out on video. We'll just copy paste the code. So I'm going to right click on the main package directory, go and create a new package named fragments. Then inside of fragments, I'm going to create another new package. One will be auth, and then the second one will be main. So right click again and go to main. So now inside of auth, I'm going to create a class named auth NavHostFragment. So auth NavHost. Actually, let's create the factory first. So auth fragment factory, because each nav host is going to need the fragment factory. So as I said, I was going to write this out on video, but I don't really see a point. Let's try and save time. So go to the master branch or go to the branch called remove dagger-android, as I said at the beginning of this video, and go to the class auth fragment factory. So main package directory, fragments, auth. I can just show you here. So we have main package directory. We're going into fragments, and then it's called auth fragment factory. That's this class right here. So I want you to copy this whole thing, and I'm just going to quickly walk through it after we paste this in. So pasting that in. So what do we got here? So notice first of all that it's scoped to the auth scope, because this is going to be the auth fragment factory, injecting on the constructor, and we're providing a view model factory through the constructor. So this is going to be the auth view model factory that we're providing through the map multi-binding. That's going to be, if you go in here, go into auth view model module, that's going to be this factory right here. It's being provided through the constructor. And then it extends fragment factory. It has a single function. Its job is to inflate whatever fragment is passed as the class. So it could be launcher fragment, login fragment, register fragment, or forgot password fragment. So those are the four fragments that if you go into UI, you go into auth, those are those four fragments here. You have forgot password fragment, launcher fragment, login, and register. We also have base auth fragment, but we are going to be deleting that. So I'm right clicking there and going to delete. We're not going to be using that anymore. Now it's giving me a warning here because we haven't set up these fragments to be able to handle constructor injection, so dependencies through their constructor. So notice it's giving me a warning, but we're going to update that and we're going to fix that. So for now, just leave this, and then we're going to go back into our fragments package and go into auth again and create a second class inside of auth called auth NavHostFragment. And just like the fragment factory, we are going to copy paste this from the source code. So let me just bring up my code again here. Now I'm going to go to, so same thing, fragments auth NavHostFragment, clicking on that. Now I'm going to copy this entire thing, go back to Android Studio and paste this in. Now this is also giving me a warning right now because right here when you set the fragment factory. So those of you who don't know how this works, I'm extending the NavHostFragment class. Remember, this is the thing that we create and we add for each one of the sections of the app. So like we have blog, we have create blog, and we have account. So remember, if you go into go into util and go into bottom nav controller, remember we're creating these navigation host things. So right here it says navhostfragment.create, and then you create that out of the different graphs. So essentially what we're going to be doing is we're creating custom ones of this navigation host. This is just the first one, auth NavHostFragment. So we extend by navhost. Before onAttach is called, we want to set the fragment factory. This is what tells the navigation host how to create the fragments that it's responsible for creating. So we're going to have a custom factory for that. That's the factory that we just created. This factory right here, auth fragment factory. This is red because a reference to that fragment factory is going to be inside auth activity. We're going to inject that. We haven't injected that yet, so that's why this is red. So when we actually do go into auth activity, inject that. I'll do that right now actually, just so that you're not confused. So let's just go up to the top here, and instead right up to the top, I'm going to do inject. We'll do late init variable, call it fragment factory, and this is going to be an auth fragment factory. So now this error will go away because that's how we're going to be providing the fragment. Now, there's lots of things we still need to do in auth activity, but we're going to come back to that later. So I'm going to close that for now. Now, this companion object, I'm sure you're very confused about this. Like, what the hell is this graph ID thing? What is this create function? What is happening here? So this is not as complicated as you might think. So let's go down into the bottom nav controller again, and just notice here I'm calling NavHostFragment.create. So this create function is being overridden essentially right here. I'm overriding that and telling it what to do. So if you actually go here, hold down Control and click on create, you can see this function. It points you to here. If you click this one, it will point you to this one down here. So literally all I did was take this function and copy its contents and then put it as a companion object inside of here. That's all I've done. And then I have the key graph ID, which is right here. So I would just hold down Control. You can see it right there. Android support nav fragment graph ID. It's just a constant. I just defined it. Nothing like incredible here. Basically, I just overrode this function so that we can create a custom one. And the reason for that is we don't need all of the fancy stuff that is inside of it. We just need to produce an auth nav host fragment. That's it. So that's all we're doing. All right. So now we need to update the fragments. So like I said before, inside of the auth fragment factory, we are doing constructor injection with the fragments. So now we need to update all of those fragments so that they can actually accept those parameters through their constructor. So let's go into launcher fragment, and we need to do some pretty drastic changes here. So we no longer have base auth fragments. We're just going to be extending by fragment. We also need to add a constructor and add an inject annotation because we're going to be doing constructor injection. And then here I want to provide that view model factory. So view model factory, this will be a view model provider.factory. So again, this is going to be the auth view model factory that's being provided here. And I can change this to the auth scope. So also I will get rid of this layout because we can pass this to the fragment constructor class up here. So I can delete on create view. We don't need that. And delete this log, and that's looking good. So now that we have reference to the view model factory, I can instantiate the view model. So I can do value view model, extend auth view model, and I want to do by view models. So this is the new way, the new way that you can instantiate view models. I just need to pass the view model factory, and then there you go. We'll have a reference to our view model. Now the one other thing I do want to do is I shouldn't have deleted base auth fragment, but before I actually did this, but it had a function in there called cancel active jobs, and cancel active jobs would cancel any active jobs jobs that were active when you switched between fragments. So like, for example, if I tried to log in and it was like just hanging there, not logging in, and then the user pressed back, we want that transaction to be canceled. So each time a new fragment comes into view, we want any previous jobs to be canceled. So to do that, we have to cancel the jobs to the view model. So I can just press Control O and insert the onCreate function, getting that one. And then after onCreate, I can just write view model.cancel active jobs. So we need to do basically this exact same thing in all of the other fragments. So inside of login fragment, register fragment, and forgot password fragment, we basically just need to copy all of this and paste it in. Pressing Control C on that, and then the next one I'll do is, let's do login fragment, sure. So I'm going to come up here and I'm going to paste that in over top of that and just move this to the next line. So this is going to be a little different. We definitely want the view model factory, but the layout is going to be different. This is going to be fragment login. We still want to get our view model. We want to cancel active jobs, and we want to get log T for debugging, although this isn't really necessary. We can actually just remove that. So that should be pretty much it. We have inject. Oh, we want to scope it. So we're going to do auth scope. Now, next we're going to do register fragment. So again, I'm copying all this up to the inject. I'm going to go into register fragment. I'm going to paste over top of all of this. Press OK, move this inject to the next line. I want to change this layout to fragment register. I want to change this to, or add the auth scope. I can get rid of this log since we're not really doing any debugging anyway. I want the view model, cancel active jobs, should be all good. I can actually delete a bunch of these imports too. So let's just clean all this up. Go back to login fragment and also do the same. So just deleting all of these imports that we're not using anymore. And then also in launcher fragment. So we have one left. I'm gonna highlight all this again, press Control C, go into forgot password fragment, and go up to the top, paste this in, press OK, move that to the next line, change this to fragment forgot password. We have everything else in here that we need. I'm just going to delete all of these logs since we don't have a log for debugging anyway. So that's all good. Oh, one more at the very bottom looks like. So there we go. I can just do e.print stack trace for that instead. And then scroll up to the top and let's clean up these dependencies or clean up these imports. Okay, so there's our fragments all set up. Notice now if we go into auth Fragment Factory, this should not be giving me a warning since these are being provided through the constructor. Yeah, so there we go. Just took a second there for Android Studio to update. Not really sure what was going on. So anyway, there's our Fragment Factory. We have that all set up. We have our fragments. I'm actually going to close all these just to kind of give us some more room. Now I'm going to go into up to the top, go to the auth package inside of DI, and we're going to create a new class named auth fragments module. So this is going to be for providing the Fragment Factory. So at module, it'll be object auth fragment module at JVM static at auth scope. We'll do provides provide fragment factory. I don't need to, oh no, I do actually need something as input, the view model factory. So we want to do auth view model factory. But the better thing to do here is actually to provide a generic. So Dagger is smart enough that it's going to look into whatever dependencies are available in this particular scope, the auth scope, as you can see here. So we don't need to specify the exact class. We can just provide the generic class, which is view model provider factory. And then this is going to return a fragment factory. Open this up, and we want to return a auth fragment factory and pass the view model factory as input. So that is going to be for providing the fragment factory, which is injected into main activity or auth activity as I did near the beginning of this video. So notice here we're injecting the auth fragment factory. This could actually be a generic also. So this could be fragment factory. We don't need to actually specify the name of it. Now let's go into, well, I'll close this. Now let's go into going into the auth component. Inside the auth component, we want to pass our new module that we just created. So the auth fragment module.class. So now our auth subcomponent is completely done and we don't need to even come back in here anymore. So I can close this. Next, I'm going to make a change to, I'm actually going to close some of this stuff because it's kind of cumbersome looking right now. So let's just minimize some of this stuff. Let's go into layout, go into activity auth, and I'm going to change this to so remember before we were using this navigation host fragment, just the basic one. Now what we want to do is change this to a fragment container view, and I want to delete the, or change the ID. The ID is going to be auth fragments container. And I want to delete this name parameter because we're no longer using this generic NavHost fragment because remember we've built a custom one. We have this auth NavHost fragment that we're going to be using. So I'm going to delete this. I'm going to leave match parent, leave the constraints, and then delete default navhost and also delete the reference to the navigation graph. So if you don't know what a fragment container view, it's essentially a new version of a frame layout. So you could use a frame layout here. There would be no problem with that. I'm just trying to use like the newest stuff. So we're going to use a fragment container view. Yes, there are advantages of using the fragment container view over the frame layout. I just can't tell you what they are right now because I haven't studied it enough. So just know that a fragment container view is the replacement of a frame layout, essentially. So you can look into it more if you want. I'll probably make a video on it like in the future, but just not right now. Okay, so now lastly for all of this auth stuff, to kind of finish up the auth stuff, other than auth activity, we still need to work on auth activity. We need a reference to the auth component. So remember, this is a subcomponent. We want this subcomponent to exist as long as the auth section of the app exists. So like this whole auth section, login, register, forgot password, launcher fragment, is basically as soon as we log into the app, we want the auth component to be destroyed and all of the dependencies associated with it to be destroyed. So there's kind of two options when it comes to saving a reference to the auth component, because no matter what, you have to save a reference to it to get access to the dependencies. As a comparison, we have the app component, and a reference to the app component is saved inside of the base application class because this component exists as long as the application is alive. So we have access to those dependencies as long as the application is alive. So we basically need something similar for the auth component, except we only want it to live as long as basically auth activity is alive. So anyway, as I said, there's two kind of options for this. The first option is we could save a reference to it in auth activity. So if I was in UI and inside of auth activity, I could save a reference to it here. Like I could do late init variable, auth component, auth component, auth component, and I could initialize that, before on create. So like right here, I could initialize it, say auth component equals application as base application, get a reference to the app component, and then do auth component dot create. I could do that. That would be totally fine. The problem with that is every time there's a rotation, the auth component gets regenerated. So that is not a good thing, because if the auth component gets regenerated, that means all of our dependencies get regenerated, meaning our view model gets recreated. So that, like, if you take a look at the finished version of the app, if I type something in here, and I go back, I go to register, maybe I start typing some stuff in here. Notice that if I go back to login, this is still here. That's still there because it's saved in the view model. Same with register. That stuff is saved in the view model. If I rotate it, it's still there. Everything's the same. Nothing changes at all. If I saved a reference to the auth subcomponent inside the activity like this, if I rotated it, all that data would be lost. Obviously, that's not what we want to happen. So for that reason, the better way to do this, I believe, is to keep a reference to it inside of the base application class. Now, there's also a problem with this because, here, let me just write it out and then I'll tell you what the problem is and how we solve that problem. So I'm going to do private variable auth component, and I'm going to do a question mark and set that to nullable. Very important that this value is nullable, and we're going to talk about that in just a second here. Now I'm going to create a function called auth component, and this function is going to be responsible for returning the auth component. So I'm going to say if the auth component equals null, then I want to instantiate that or create one. So in that case, I want to do app component auth component dot create, and then I want to return that auth component. Oh, I have to do as auth component. So that's how to get a reference to it. Just going to give myself some more room here. Now, there's a problem with this. In the application, we only want the auth component to live as long as the auth section is alive. So essentially, like I said, as soon as I was to log in with a valid email, so mitch@taming.ca, if I type my password and log in, we want the auth component to be destroyed. But if we keep a reference to it in the application class, it's not going to be destroyed because the application is still alive. So what we have to do is create kind of a helper function to clean up the auth component once we don't need it anymore. So essentially we want something to null it out, and that's what we're going to build here. So I'll create a function named release auth component, and what this is going to do is just do auth component and set that equal to null. So essentially what we'll do is when the user navigates successfully to main activity, so like if they successfully log in, then we want to make sure that we call release auth component, and it would null it out and then get rid of all those dependencies. So that's how we're going to be handling that. And I think that's the best way, because the alternative is keeping it inside the activity or writing some weird logic inside the activity where maybe you save a flag to the instance state. I don't know. It just seems like that could get ugly. This is pretty clean. It's a pretty easy way to do it. So this is what I think we should do. All right. So now we're ready to update auth activity. Base activity is still giving some errors. Let me just delete that dependency and that should be fine. So now I can close all of these things because we're done in all of those classes. I'm going to minimize this, and we're going to go inside of auth activity and make the necessary changes to add all the stuff that we have just added. So first, I want to get rid of this on destination change listener. The reason for that on destination change listener was, as you can see here, to cancel any active jobs whenever there was a navigation. So if I was in login fragment, clicked login, it was trying to log in, and then before it logged in, I clicked back. We want that job to cancel. So instead, we've already handled that, right? Inside of each fragment, we have cancel active jobs being called. So that's totally fine. So we can get rid of the navigation change listener, and that kind of cleans things up a little bit. To get rid of that, we're not creating the view models this way anymore. So notice we're using the old view model provider thing, not using that anymore. We can delete that, get rid of some of these imports that we had before. And this is giving me a warning saying I need to implement some members. So it's getting that inject function that we created inside of the base activity class. So inside of inject, I want to add this to the Dagger graph. So if we take a look inside of DI and go into auth and go into the auth component, notice that we have to add auth activity to the Dagger graph through this subcomponent. That gives auth activity access to all these dependencies, everything inside auth module, the view model factory, the fragment factory, all that stuff. So we need to make sure that we do that. So I'm going to write application as base application. We want to get a reference to the app component, and then I can get, or no, actually, because we now have a reference to the auth component, so I'm getting a reference to that, and then just writing inject and then this. That will allow me to now, I can get rid of this provider factory. That will, also the view model, because we're going to be providing that a different way. That'll allow us to inject the fragment factory, and we also will need to inject the view model factory, which I just deleted by accident. So that's going to be provider factory, and we'll call it view model provider.factory. And now we can initialize the view model. So value view model will be an auth view model by view models, which remember is now the latest and greatest way to initialize view models, and then just pass that provider factory. Next, we need to set up the navigation host. Or we need to create the navigation host and set it to that fragment container view that we created. So if we go into activity auth, remember we have this fragment container view, we need to create a new auth NavHostFragment. So if we go into fragment, go into auth, go into auth NavHostFragment, we need to create one of those and set it to this container view, and also give it a reference to the graph. So let's create a function for that. So just below on create, I'm going to create a new function. I'll scroll down to give some more room. So private function create navhost, value navhost equals auth NavHostFragment.create. Remember, this is that create function that we overrode inside of the companion object. So it's this create function right here. So calling that, and this takes one parameter, that's the graph that it uses. So r.navigation.authNavGraph. Now I want to add that to the container. So support fragment manager, begin transaction.replace. I want to pass r.id.the container name, so auth fragments container. That's the container inside of activity auth right here. Pass the container name. I want to pass the navigation host. Then I want to pass the name to the fragment. So get string r.string. I don't think I've added this yet, so we're going to need to add this. Nav host. I'm going to press Control C to copy that. Let's go into strings.xml. So strings.xml. Scroll down to the very bottom, create a string, give it a name of auth navhost, close this off, and then just call it auth navhost. We're going to need to add some more later too. We're going to need an account one, blog, create blog, all that stuff. So we'll come back and do those later. So that is the name. Now I want to do set primary navigation fragment and pass the navhost, and then .commit. So that's going to obviously add that to that container and set up our fragments correctly. Now, there is a problem with this. I can't just call this inside of onCreateView or whatever. I have to make sure that it doesn't already exist before I create one, because if you have one already in view and then you did a rotation, we don't want to create another new one. We want to reuse the old one that's already in view. So I'm going to create another new function below onCreate. I'll do private fun on restore instance state. It'll take nothing, it'll return nothing, and then just open this up. Now what I want to do is get a reference to the host if it already exists. So I want to do support fragment manager .find fragment by ID r.id.authFragment container. Now I want to check if that's null. So I can do host.let. If that exists, I want to, or if it doesn't exist, I want to do nothing. But if it already exists, I want it to do nothing. But if it doesn't exist, then I want to create a navigation host. So create navhost. And then I can just call this inside of onCreate, so on restore instance state. And that will handle that rotation issue that I talked about. Now I want to scroll down to the bottom here, and looks like I'm getting some issues. This should not be a problem, fragment container. Yeah, I think I just accidentally deleted the import. So scrolling back up to the top, I think this is all we need to do to finish kind of all the stuff for auth, for the auth section. Oh, actually one thing I forgot, one of the most important things, inside of nav main activity, remember we want to release that auth component, that auth subcomponent when we navigate into the application. So I want to do release auth component. So as soon as we navigate to main activity, get rid of that auth component, and null it out because we don't need it anymore. All right, so that's going to be it for the auth section. Now I would normally say let's run it now and test it, but we can't because we have too many there'll be too many Dagger conflicts and Dagger issues. We still got a lot of refactoring to go. So now basically what we're going to do is do everything that we just did in the auth section and do it into the main package. Although there will be a little bit more work because we have kind of 3 individual features here. But basically what we just did is exactly what we're going to do now, just over and over again and 3 more times. I just got back from taking a 5 or 10 minute break. I suggest you pause now and take a 5-10 minute break. Not that the stuff that we're going to be doing is particularly difficult till the end of the video, but we've been going for, I don't know, quite a while now. Take a break, come back, and finish the video. Okay, so we want to do the same thing that we just did in auth, but inside of account, blog, and create blog. So the first step in that procedure is creating a fragment factory for account section, a fragment factory for blog section, a fragment factory for create blog section, and then creating a NavHostFragment for account, a NavHostFragment for blog, and a NavHostFragment for create blog. So let's do all of that, and then we'll move to the next step. So let's go into fragments. We have this main package. So inside of main, I'm going to create 3 more packages. One will be account, one will be blog, and one will be create blog. So create underscore blog. Okay, so now we want to do the same thing. Like I said, going to minimize this. So I'm going to copy the auth fragment factory. So just pressing Control C on there. I'm going to paste it into account. Actually, well, we could do this, or you could go into the source code and just copy them because they're all largely the same. I'll actually just do it on video, but it's up to you if you want to just copy them. So this is going to be a count fragment factory. So this is going to be very much the same, other than this will be a main scope. We're still getting the provider factory. The map multi-binding is smart enough that it will see that this is the main scope. It exists inside of the main component, so it will give the correct view model factory. And then we want to change these fragments. So let's just delete these. And the first one is going to be well, if we look in here, if we look inside of UI, we have 4 fragments, 3 fragments. We have account fragments, excuse me, we have change password fragments, and we have update account fragments. So let's do all 3 of those. So account fragments, this is going to take the view model factory as input. Oh, whoops, what happened there? I accidentally opened the launcher fragment somehow. So that will take the view model factory as input. Now I'm going to copy, or just put this down here. Now I'm going to copy this and do the next one. The next one is going to be update account fragment. So update account fragments. And then the third one will be the change password fragment. So change password fragment and change password fragment. Now this is going to have a warning because we obviously haven't changed those fragments yet to do constructor injection, but we will be doing that. Okay, so now let's create the next fragment factory. So I'm gonna copy the account fragment factory, go into blog and paste that in, and then rename this to blog fragment factory. Now, of course, we need to change this to show the correct fragments. So inside of blog, we have a couple. We have blog fragment, update blog fragment, and view blog fragment. So this will be blog fragment. This is also going to take a second dependency, actually. So private value needs the request manager. So that's the glide request manager for setting images. If you take a look at, I believe in base blog fragment, nope, not in there. Maybe in blog fragment. No, I know we use it. Oh, it's through the dependency provider. So if you look at blog fragments, if you scroll down, you can see we're using the main dependency provider and getting the glide request manager through there. So we're going to be getting rid of we can actually see this main dependency provider, just delete this. We don't need that anymore. So obviously that's not going to exist anymore. So we'll need to get the request manager through this way. So request manager, and this will be passed as a second parameter. All of these are going to take the request manager. So blog fragment, then we have view blog fragment, then we have update blog fragment. So update blog fragment, and then the last one down at the bottom will again be blog fragment, making sure to pass the request manager. So that's another fragment factory down. Now we're gonna have one more to go. So just pressing Control C on this again, going to create blog, pasting that in, and then changing this to create blog fragment factory. So again, we will need the request manager because that's going to be used inside of create blog fragment. and then just changing these. So create blog fragment, create blog fragment, and then create blog fragment. So pretty straightforward on that one. So there's our 3 new fragment factories. And obviously that's showing errors here because we need to update those fragments to allow constructor injection, which we're going to do later. So just close all those for now. Now we're going to build the navigation host for each one of these packages. So again, I'm going to press Control C on the auth NavHostFragment. I'm going to paste it into the account package, and this will be account NavHostFragment. And then pressing OK. I'm not going to scope this. Everything is the same actually. Actually the only thing that we need to change is this to main activity, and then that will get the fragment factory. Main activity. In hindsight, now that I'm thinking about this, I don't think that we need 3. We don't need one for each one of these packages. We can just use a single one and then provide a different graph. I'll just bring up the source code just to look at this. So if we look at the source code and we go into util, go into bottom nav controller, if I scroll down to where we create these, yeah, like the account navhost fragment, blog navhost, and create blog navhost, these could be the same. They just reference different graphs. So actually, now that I'm thinking about this in hindsight, we could just create one. So I'm going to press Control X on account navhost fragment. I'm going to paste it into the main package here. So just refactor that. So these packages will just contain the fragment factory, and then we'll have one navigation host, which we'll call main navigation host. So main navhost fragment, because we don't need 3. One is fine for all 3 of those, because we just would pass a separate graph. Because the only difference is the main activity, which is the fragment factory. So yeah, that should be fine. So now we're going to need to do a lot more in main activity later on, but just for now, just inject the fragment factory just so that error goes away. So late init var fragment factory, and this will be main fragment. Or actually, it's smart enough, so I can just do view model provide, or come on brain, fragment factory. There we go. That will inject our fragment factory. That error should now go away. Our nav host is good to go. Okay, so now we need to update the fragments. So I'm going to close main activity. I'm going to close the main nav host fragment for now. And now I'm going to update the fragments inside of the account package. So first of all, we'll start with base account fragment. Now I know inside of auth, we actually deleted the base fragment, but inside of main, we're going to keep the base fragments because they actually still provide a lot of utility, even though there's a lot of stuff that we can remove. So first, let's start deleting stuff. We're going to get rid of this injectable thing, get rid of the main dependency provider, get rid of how the view model is instantiated inside of onCreate. What else do we need? Get rid of is view model initialized. I don't like these comments. I'm going to delete those. Delete anything that's red, basically. Get rid of these comments too, because I don't like the way comments look. I just added those for when we were teaching. Cancel active jobs is actually going to be an abstract function. So abstract fun cancel active jobs, and get rid of that because we're going to implement that in each one of the fragments because it's going to be, we're not going to have a reference to the view model inside of the base class. So I'm going to delete that. Don't delete this stuff yet. Don't delete the stuff that's in onCreate and onSave instance state because we're going to use this inside of the fragments. So it'll just be easier to copy paste it over. So just leave those for now. And then scrolling down to onAttach, get rid of that. And everything else I think is okay. So remember this stuff, I mean, you can actually just comment this out for now, but just leave it though, because we're going to need that inside of the other fragments. So we can leave the state change listener, and I'm going to make a change to the constructor. I'm going to add a constructor. So constructor, it's going to take a layout resource. So that'll be private value layout res, and that'll be an integer. And then we're going to pass that layout resource to the constructor of the class extension. So that's just so that we can set the layouts. So like inside of any of these fragments, for example, remember that I passed the layout to the fragment constructor. Well, if you're using a base class, you need to pass it from the fragment itself that it's extending. So this is kind of the only way to do it. So just change that. Other than that, I think this is good to go. This we're going to copy over to the other fragments. So let's go into account fragment and make some serious changes here. So first of all, I'm going to take the layout and pass that to the class extension. So that's what I was just talking about with the constructor and the layout resource here. Now we want to add a constructor here, and we also want to do mark this as, or use inject, because we're going to be injecting this. And you can also scope this to the main scope if, whoops, main scope, and tab this in. So now the dependency that we're going to be providing here is the view model factory and also the request manager from Glide. Or actually not the request manager from Glide, that's going to come in the blog section. So just the view model factory. So private value view model factory. This will be a view model provider.factory, and we need that to instantiate the view model. So value view model equals a account view model type. That'll be by view models, the new fancy way to instantiate view models. I'll use that factory to do that, getting that import. Now, as I said, we need to copy paste a bunch of stuff over from the base class. So I'm going to uncomment this. I'm going to cut it. So pressing Control X, now going back to account fragment and then pasting that in. So inside of onCreate, we have some imports that we need to get here, getting that. So now onCreate will cancel active jobs, save the instance state, all that stuff, restore the instance state. So that's all good. We also need to insert the abstract function cancel active jobs. So cancel active jobs, getting that. Remember, that's a function that we created inside of the base class, this one right here. So just inserting that, and then what do we want to do? We want to do view model dot cancel active jobs. So the same thing as with the login or the auth section. If we have like an active job in any of these fragments and we switch to a different fragment, we want to cancel any of the jobs that were active. So that's all that this is doing, and it's called inside of onCreate right here. So that should be it. Now we just want to do the same kind of thing in each of the other fragments. So I'm going to copy everything from cancel active jobs, on save instance state, on create, copy the view model, all the way up to the inject, pressing Control C on that. Now I'm going to go into change password fragment, and I'm going to paste over top of this right here. So pasting over that, going to the next line, and then annotating this with the main scope. And I want to change the layout. So the layout is going to be change password. Now all of this should be pretty much the same. Yeah, everything is the same. We have the injecting the view model factory, instantiating the view model. On create is canceling the job, saving the instance state, or restoring the instance state, saving the instance state, canceling jobs. Everything should be good there. So now we want to do that one more time. So again, copying everything from cancel active jobs up to @inject, going to update account fragment, pasting over on create view, pasting that in, moving the inject to the next line, and then just doing main scope. And I just need to change the layout. So fragment, update account. And all of this should be exactly the same. So that is 1 out of 3 done. We've done the account section. That should be all good to go. Now we're ready to move on to the blog section, but we're basically just repeating the process. We're going to do the exact same thing. Okay, so let's close everything, I guess. Yeah, we'll close it. Now we'll go into base blog fragment and start deleting stuff. So start by deleting all of the red stuff, deleting the dependency provider, deleting the instantiation of the view model, deleting the instantiation of the view model there. This stuff, again, we're going to be copying over. So on create will be copied over. So don't delete that. Just comment out on create for now. And also we'll delete this, is the view model initialized, delete these comments, take the on save instance state, and that's also going to be commented out. So I'm going to just press comment that out, delete cancel active jobs, because that's going to be an abstract function. So abstract function cancel active jobs. Then remember, we're going to use that inside each fragment class. Delete these comments, and then delete this dependency provider down at the bottom. So same kind of thing that we did in the other fragments. Should be nothing kind of special here. Cleaning up these imports. And now I want to change this to add that constructor to provide the layout resource. So adding the constructor, annotating with layout resource, doing private value layout res, and that's an integer, and then I can just provide that to the fragment right here and tab all this in, and that should be much nicer. So that should be it. Now let's move on to the fragments. So let's go into blog fragment first of all, and let's change this. So what do we need to do? Well, first we need a constructor. So let's go to the next line, create a constructor. We also need to annotate this with @inject. we need two dependencies provided through this constructor. Let's go to the next line, tab that out just to clean it up. Private value view model factory. This will be a view model provider.factory. The next line will be private value request manager. Remember, we need those for Glide. And here we need to provide the layouts, r.layout.fragment blog. So that's the beginning of our fragment. Now we can delete on create view, and we should instantiate our view model. So value view model, it's going to be of type blog view model by view models. Same sort of thing we've been doing, nothing new here. Pass the view model factory. Now I want to go into the base class, so the base blog fragment, and uncomment this stuff here and then cut it, so Control X. Now go back to blog fragment and we can paste that in just below everything here and get some imports. So we need the view state bundle key. Oh, and delete this is view model initialized. We don't need that. And then tab this in. So that stuff's all good. Now we need the cancel active jobs function. So going down below here, cancel active jobs. And I just want to write view model.cancel active jobs. Now the rest of this stuff should be the same. So I'm going to copy everything from cancel active jobs all the way up to on create. Oh, this is going to be tough because we have a bunch of variables here. So you know what I'm going to do, just to make this a little easier, I'm going to cut the search view and the recycler view adapter. I'm going to come back to this and clean it up after. Just paste it below cancel active jobs. It just makes the copy pasting easier. Now I'm going to copy everything all the way up. Oh, this isn't done actually. So the request manager, see this red over here? So scroll down, we need to pass the request manager to where the dependency provider was providing the request manager. So again, this one right here. So request manager, there we go. All right, so now I'll go back up to the top and do what I was just about to do. So I want to copy everything from cancel active jobs, on save instance state, on create, the view model instantiation, all the way up to inject. This stuff we don't need, but I can just remove that. And also we can clean up some of these imports. Looks like we got a bunch of stuff that we don't need here. So deleting all that. So that's copied. Now let's go into view blog fragment and paste over on create view and paste that in, press OK. Now we need to get rid of this interface, the blog list adapter interface, the refresh layout thingy. And then that is everything that we need. Delete these imports. So that's looking much better. If you scroll down here, you'll notice some red on the side. We need to pass the request manager that we were previously getting from the dependency provider. So that should be good for this one, much easier. Oh, also annotate with at main scope, and you can do the same thing with blog fragment. This is main scope also. So now copy everything from the inject all the way down to cancel active jobs. So Control C on that. Going into update blog fragment, I'm going to paste over on create view, just like we've done before. Move the inject, and then annotate with main scope. So this is again much easier. Now scrolling down to again where we have this warning and pass the request manager. So request manager. All right, so those three fragments should be good to go now. So I just want to go back to blog fragment. And remember, I cut those two variables, the search view and the recycle view adapter. So I'm just going to cut those again and then move those back up to the top where they belong, because that was just to make the copy pasting easier. So there's our three fragments inside of the blog package. So I can close these down. Our base class is also done. Now we're going to move on to the last one, which is create blog, which is the smallest one, so it's easiest. Okay, so cleaning up all of the stuff that doesn't exist anymore, getting rid of the injectable interface, main dependency provider, goodbye. View model, goodbye. View model instantiation, goodbye. On create, remember we're going to paste that into the fragment itself. So just kind of deleting this stuff, cleaning it up. So we have on save instance state, on create. I'm going to comment those out, and I'm going to make an abstract function out of the cancel active jobs. So cancel active jobs is now abstract. That's good. Get rid of those comments. Get rid of the dependency provider. Now we're ready to move on to the fragment. Now that I'm just going to clean up those dependencies. Oh, the layout resource actually too. So we can add a constructor here, do at layout resource, do private value layout resource. It'll be an integer, and tab this stuff in, and then make sure to pass that as input. I can't remember if I passed that as input in the previous one. Let me just double check. Base blog fragment. Yes, I did, so that's good. All right, so now let's go into the very last fragment, which will be create, whoops, wrong one, create blog fragment. We need to add a constructor. We need to annotate this with @inject. Also add the main scope. Move this in. Now the dependencies that we need are private value view model factory. This will be a view model provider.factory. Then we need the request manager, so private value request manager. So those are two dependencies. Now we want to instantiate, actually pass the layout, so layout.fragment create blog. Now I can delete on create view. I want to instantiate the view model, so value view model equals blog view model, or create blog view model, create blog view model by view models. And then we can pass that view model factory. There we go. Now go back to base create blog fragment. I can uncomment this stuff that was here before. I'm going to cut that by pressing Control X. Come back in here, paste that in, get the required imports. Now I need to insert the cancel active jobs override method. So I want to do view model.cancel active jobs, and then scroll down to where you see errors on the sidebar over here, and then just pass the request manager. So request manager, and then one more time request manager. And that should be good. That is the final fragment. Now let's see, what is still left? Looks like main activity. We have main activity, and also we haven't done the Dagger stuff yet for all the new fragment stuff that we just created. So remember, inside of DI, inside of auth, we created the auth fragments module. We need to do the same thing for main. So I'm going to copy the auth fragments module, paste it inside of main, and call this main fragments module. And then we need to add the fragment factory for each one of those. So this is going to be the main scope. And I need to do provide fragment factory, the view model, yes. I also need the request manager. So request manager, and this first fragment factory will be provide account fragment factory, which we actually don't need the request manager for. So the first one, let's see, this will be account fragment factory. Account fragment factory, it takes a view model factory. Now we need to do the other two. So the blog view model factory and create blog factory. So provide blog fragment factory. This one requires a request manager as input. So blog fragment factory, and then also the request manager. And the last one is provide create blog fragment factory. This one also requires the request manager. Maybe give you some more room here so you can get a better view. So create blog fragment factory. There's the view model factory, and then the request manager. So those are three fragment factories. Now those can be injected into main activity. And I just realized that I didn't make a mistake. I guess you wouldn't call it a mistake, but I did forget something. So well, first let's just add this to the components. So this will be main fragment, or is it? What is it? It's main fragments module. So let's add that as a dependency, because then that way we're done with this. So remember when I was building the stuff in the fragments, when I built the main NavHost fragment, remember I was saying, oh yeah, I can just use one NavHost for all three. Well, it's not true, because each of these navigation hosts, so like main NavHost, or each of the navigation hosts has a different fragment factory. So we have, like I said, we have account fragment factory, blog fragment factory, create blog fragment factory. So each of the navigation hosts needs to reference a different factory. So having one doesn't work. So you have to create three of them. So I'm going to take this main NavHost fragment, move it into account, refactor. So now inside of account, I want to refactor the naming to account NavHost fragment. So account NavHost fragment. And then this fragment factory will be account fragment factory. So you should see what I'm saying now that I've described that. So like, and then in main activity, we're not just going to have one fragment factory. I'm going to have account fragment factory, and then also the other ones. So we actually need a named parameter here so that it knows which one. So like, just do named, and I can do account fragment factory as the name here. And then I have to do one for each. So I'm going to copy this again, paste it 2 more times. This will be blog fragment factory, and then this one can be create blog fragment factory, and then this name, of course, blog fragment factory and create blog fragment factory, because we need those 3 different ones. So I'm going to close main activity for now, but we're going to come back to that. So that error should go away. Now, so also that named parameter, if you didn't know, Dagger can specify, like if you're returning the same type, but you want to differentiate between 3 different dependencies or 4 different dependencies, whatever number of dependencies, you can provide this named parameter. So I'm going to copy this at named and go into DI, go into main, go into main fragments module, and you have to specify the name parameter up here too. So this is account fragment factory. This one is going to be blog fragment factory. And then this one will be create blog fragment factory. So create blog fragment factory. That way it knows which one is which one to inject. Otherwise you'll get a dependency conflict. So now I'm going to minimize DI. I'm going to copy account NavHostFragment, paste it into blog, and change this to blog NavHostFragment. So blog NavHostFragment. Now everything's going to be the same here, except it's going to reference the correct fragment factory. So I can close this. Now I'm going to copy blog NavHostFragment, paste it into create blog, and then just change the name. So create blog NavHostFragment, and then of course change the name to create blog Fragment Factory. So we do need 3. I thought we could get away with 1 for all of them, but that's not going to work when it comes to building the navigation controller. All right, so now before I move on to updating the navigation controller, the bottom nav controller, and also main activity, we forgot to do one other thing in DI, or I forgot to do one other thing in DI, which was, or not in DI actually, in the base application class, I forgot to save a reference to the main component. So we have a reference to the auth component. We also need a reference to the main component. So let's call this main component, and we're going to do the same kind of thing. We want to hold a reference to it, but only hold a reference to it for as long as the main kind of package exists. So for example, if you're in any of these fragments, we would have that component existing, but as soon as the user logs out, we want to destroy the main component. So basically when they navigate to auth activity, destroy the main component because those dependencies are no longer needed. So we have main component, it's nullable. I'm going to copy these 2 functions, paste them above. This will be called main component. It will return a type of main component, and then just change all of these. So main component equals main component dot main component. Whoops, this is app component. Get a reference to the main component dot create. I want to return main component as a main component, and then the last function here is release main component. And then we want to set that null. So exactly the same thing we did as with the auth component. So next I'm going to update the bottom nav controller, and then we're going to go and finish up by updating main activity. So I'm going to minimize DI, I'm going to minimize UI, go into util, and go into bottom nav controller. So this is going to change quite a bit now because we have a different kind of, well, not quite a bit, but we have a different system for we have a different nav host for each of the bottom entries. We can also delete some stuff. So before I had this nav graph provider, which is essentially just, if I search this, it's just an interface for providing the navigation graph ID given a menu ID. So what do I mean by that? If you go down into menu and go into main bottom navigation menu, each of these items has an ID. So this is menu nav blog, menu nav create blog, and menu nav account. Each of these has an ID, and each of these IDs need to correspond to a certain navigation graph. So like when the user clicks, let me just log into the app again. So each of the bottom navigation entries, these are menu items, they have menu IDs, but when they're clicked, they need to create a certain navigation graph. So that interface was basically just responsible for translating, given a certain menu item, inflate a certain navigation graph. So we don't need that anymore because we have different nav graphs. But I'll talk more about that when we get to it. But just know that we don't need it anymore. Also notice that I didn't add this in any video, but I changed the IDs of these to menu nav blog, menu nav create blog, and menu nav account. So you'll need to update your code and change these IDs, just so you know, because I did that off camera. So now this nav graph provider, we can just delete this. It's not needed anymore. And if I scroll up to the top, we can delete this also from the constructor. Okay, now scroll down to on navigation item selected, and down below this, we're going to create a new function. This function is going to be for creating a nav host. So it'll be called private function create nav host. It'll be similar to what we did in auth activity, but we have different nav hosts. So given a certain menu ID, so like I said, they'll be like selecting a menu item from the bottom navigation. It's going to return a fragment. It's going to return a NavHostFragment. So I want to do, actually I can just set this equal to, so set it equal to a when statement. So when the menu item ID is one of the selections, so the first one is r.id.menu nav. I can do menu nav account as the first one, sure. In that case, I want to do account NavHostFragment.create and do r.navigation.nav account. So this is why we don't need that interface, that navigation provider interface that we just deleted, because we have this when statement that's handling basically that, exactly what it did. So that's the first option. The second option is going to be menu nav blog, and in that case, I want to do blog NavHostFragment, and of course, use the correct navigation graph, and then copy it one more time and do menu create nav create blog, and this is create our nav create blog, and then else as a default we'll just set the account nav, or we'll set the blog NavHostFragment as the default. Okay, now scrolling up a little bit, we're going to delete the way, or change the way that this is done. So it'll look for the fragment. If that fragment exists, then just reuse it. Otherwise, we want to create a new nav host and then just pass the menu item ID. So a better name for this is menu item ID, and then pass this right here and change all of these to menu item ID. Okay, I believe that's good for bottom nav controller. Now we need to go into main activity and finish up. So go into main activity. Start by deleting these because we removed those. Delete any unused imports up at the top. We can delete these two override methods for getting the request manager, getting the view model factory. We also don't need to inject the request manager here. I don't need to inject the view model factory. Scrolling up, it's giving me a warning. I need to implement the inject function, so just getting that. So we need to add main activity to the graph. So application, base application, we want to do main component and then inject and then this. So that adds main activity to that main component, the subcomponent. So that's good. Now if I scroll up to the top, I'm still getting some warnings. This is referencing an interface that doesn't exist anymore, so we can delete that. This is the override function for the interface that doesn't exist anymore. So delete get nav graph ID. And it's still giving me some warnings if I scroll down to the bottom. This is just a missing import, and that's fine. So that should be good. Other than the last thing I think is when we navigate to auth activity, so nav auth activity, we need to release that subcomponent. So application as base application dot release, we want to release the main component. So release main component. Remember, when we navigate back to the auth section, we don't need any of the dependencies associated with the main component because it's a subcomponent that should only exist as long as the user is authenticated. So we want to release those resources. Whew. Now, I think that's it. I would be very surprised if I ran this and Dagger built and everything worked the first time, because this whole time I've been recording, I haven't built the project at all. I've been just trying to get this done. So I don't know. I mean, I'm gonna build the project now, but there's probably gonna be issues. So we're gonna have to. It's mostly done now. We're just gonna have to clean up any things that I forgot. So I'm rebuilding. Let's pray. Let's see if it works the first time. It's very unlikely, but let's find out. All right, we got an error. No surprises here. Let's see here. It says auth component may not reference scoped bindings. I'm gonna pause the video and figure out what's going on. I don't want to waste your time. Oh, I forgot to scope the subcomponents. That's why, because we are using the auth scope and we're also using the main scope. So we need to. I just forgot to scope these to show that these subcomponents own those scopes. So just add main scope to main component and add auth scope to auth component. All right, let's rebuild and pray again. Pray once again to the Dagger gods that the project will build the first time. It's probably going to take a while. I bet you this is going to take like a minute to build. So I'll see ya when it builds. Oh, wow, it actually built. Cool. Okay, so let's run it and see if we get any issues. Fingers crossed. All right, so the app starts, but I want to tour the entire application. So I'm going to log out and log in and try and use it. So first I want to test the view model to make sure that it's saving the values. So I'm just typing some values in here. Now I'm going to go to register fragments, just type some values in here, go back, go to login fragments. That stuff should still be saved. That's good, so that should be working. Now I'm going to log in. So I'm going to pause the video so you don't see my password. All right, so we're logged in. Now I'm just going to click around and see if I can get it to crash. It does crash already. Wow. So I clicked on if you didn't see what I did there, I clicked on a blog post and it crashed. So again, I'm going to pause the video and I'm going to see what's wrong, and then I'll come back and we'll fix it. Oh, looks like this is a pretty simple fix. I just forgot, I passed the wrong layout. So I'm inside of view blog fragment and I passed the layout for fragment blog. So fragment view blog. I'm just going to check the others to see if I did the same thing. So going into UI, going into blog, let's take a look at update blog fragment. Scroll up to the top. Yep, same thing. So this should be fragment update blog. So fixing fragment update blog, fixing view blog fragment. I'm going to go into create blog fragment and double check that one also. So create blog fragment. This one is okay. So Shift F10 to rerun that, and let's see what we're dealing with. All right, so the app starts again. Let's scroll, click on a blog. There we go. That takes us to the correct fragment. Click on that. That's good too. Click on the create section. That is wrong. So I clicked on create blog. Looks like it inflated the wrong graph. So that leads me to believe that inside of the bottom nav controller, I specified the wrong ID. So menu nav account is nav account, menu nav blog is nav blog, menu nav create blog is, oh, I see wrong NavHostFragment. So this should be create blog NavHostFragment, and then create that. So that's that problem. Shift F10 to run that again. Let's try it again. Okay, so clicking on a blog, going to update fragment, clicking on create, that looks good. Going to account, that looks good. Clicking on here, that looks good. Change password, that looks good. So now I'm going to rotate this. I should see the exact same thing, no crashes. Rotate back, should see the exact same thing. Now let's test the back navigation. So that's good, 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 and good. Okay, I think we're done. So chances are there's probably a bug, like just because I've been sitting here for like an hour and a half recording, straight writing code, and I haven't like thoroughly tested this. See, this is an example of when it would be great to have UI tests, because then I could just run the UI tests, and even though I made all of these code changes, if the app still functioned as it was supposed to, then we know that it's good. So people are always asking me like, Mitch, why would you want UI tests? Like, what is the point? This is a perfect example. You do like a serious refactor and you want to see if everything's working correctly, you would just run your UI test and then you would know. So I don't have any UI test built, obviously, so we don't have that luxury, but we'll assume that everything is working correctly and go from there. So I'm sure if you guys find any bugs, you'll let me know. But the plan is now for the next video, I'm going to refactor the way that we have our MVI architecture so that we integrate channels and flows to handle simultaneous state events, so different requests in parallel. So if you liked the video, make sure to let me know on Discord, because this took a lot of effort. I had to refactor this, and recording a video like this is a pain in the ass. And theoretically, this isn't going to bring me more revenue because people have already bought the course. So like, this is not really a money thing, but I wanted to refactor this and use kind of all the newest stuff, use dagger-android, use channels and flows. So yeah, let me know if you liked the refactor. I really liked it, and I will see you in the next video.